Hey everyone, it's me, Delilah Rose Mansour, author of the Road to Golgotha series. Last week when we had our wonderful book launch, lots of people were at the live IG party, and some people were requesting if I could post chapter 2 for them because it was easy for them to work or clean around the house and get to listen to the story that way. So with that said, I am here posting chapter 2. I'm going to keep this real brief for a quick announcement. My interview with From the Shadows podcast is live on their YouTube page, or I think you can find them on Stitcher or Apple podcast thing. From the Shadows is a podcast that is dedicated to all things supernatural and paranormal, and I got to recount some of the supernatural and strange experiences that I had as a young child and how those experiences shaped my faith and how I became a Christian today, and why it is so important that we have a personal relationship with Jesus. So with that said, if you'd like to see it, I have posted the link to my Facebook page, and you should be able to see it on my Instagram. So without further ado, let's get into chapter 2. Oh, that rhymed. Okay. I gotta put on my author voice, my reading voice. Chapter 2. Late afternoon came, and they were still driving in circles. First the fallen tree, then an overturned trailer, and finally a blockade of barbed wire and wooden stakes. It was clear they were being stalked. The solar panel's battery dipped dangerously into the red. Storm clouds blocked out the sun, bringing a premature dusk. Night is coming, Chambers said wearily, more to himself than anyone else. We need to get somewhere safe before this battery dies. Look, Katura pointed. Here's a road we haven't tried. Up ahead was a solid concrete overpass, and through it a dark tunnel. On the other side, light shone dimly. That's an old government tunnel, Chambers replied. It leads into ground zero. Dad, I don't want to go in there, Bellatrix said anxiously, shaking her head. In the rearview mirror, something flashed. Headlights, Katura gasped. Chambers swallowed hard, glancing back into the rearview mirror. Bellatrix sat up straight and looked out the windows in the rear doors. Headlights glared down the road, so blindingly bright they hurt her eyes and made her see spots. Oh my goodness, what do we do? Katura said in a hushed whisper, as if whoever was beaming the headlights could somehow hear her. An engine revved. It wasn't like the nearly silent solar-powered one. It was a diesel-fueled engine, the loud sort that made stinking fumes. The one state had forbidden them from the general public, but allowed certain government vehicles to use the filthy oil it took to run them. She used to think it was a design flaw, that their solar panels shouldn't run out of power at night, but now that their van was shutting down, she could see why this had been to the one state's advantage. No one could escape easily under the cover of darkness. That's why her family had to escape on foot so long ago. But escaping on foot wouldn't be an option tonight. Pray, her father uttered and bore down on the gas pedal. Bellatrix cupped her hands over her ears and began chanting, "The Lord is my shepherd, the Lord is my shepherd." But she couldn't remember the rest of the words. Why couldn't she remember the rest of the words? The headlights pursued them into the darkness of the tunnel, the roar of its engine reverberating off the concrete walls. No, 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 Katura exclaimed, staring over her shoulder at the headlights gaining on them. We're gonna make it, Chambers said with resolve. Another light up ahead in the distance, the exit. The solar panels signaled that it was shutting down, and the van was coasting on kinetic energy. Although it was slowing, Bellatrix could see that, yes, they would make it into the dim light just beyond the mouth of the tunnel. When the van burst through, they were in the heart of Ground Zero itself, not far from where the drop had been. She could tell by the collection of skeletal buildings circling a deep crater in the ground, around which was several feet of dusty, empty earth. Behind them, the engine roar quieted. The headlight slowly approached, growing larger and brighter, like the glowing eyes of a cat slowly stalking its prey from the shadows. All around them was rubble, the shells of rusting cars and shattered sidewalks. The streets were devastated, but someone had taken the time to clear the roads enough to be passable by vehicle. Heaps of stone and steel lined the primitive streets of dirt and pulverized concrete. Bellatrix felt like her lungs were deflating. Her heart raced out of control and hot tears sprang to her eyes. I can't breathe. I can't breathe, Bellatrix wept, clutching her hand to her chest. Get your weapons, Chambers commanded, ignoring her complaint. What? Bellatrix repeated, terror engulfing her. This was worse than her worst fear. Invisible hands were choking her. Get your weapons, her father roared. The predator chasing them finally came into view. Out from the tunnel came a huge diesel truck, an 18-wheel government vehicle, excuse me, I had an incoming FaceTime. Out from the tunnel came a huge diesel truck, an 18-wheel government shipping vehicle, as determined by the cracked and peeling insignia on the doors. 2 men hung off the sides of it, waving their large blades and hollering war cries. Their driver, a woman with black hair and a whip-thin braid hanging over her shoulder. She was barely visible from behind the grimy windshield. Cruelly, she waved a hello and honked the horn in such a friendly manner you'd have thought they were old friends in a chance encounter. Bellatrix froze. Her blood went cold as the man dangling off the driver's side of the truck hopped off and began slowly walking towards the stalled van. There was a bandage round his head. He pointed directly at her with his weapon, a serrated blade as long as her forearm. Bellatrix recognized him instantly and began to panic. No, she whimpered, her heart pounding like a rhythm too fast to dance to. Katura caught her breath. It's him. That man. I told you should have killed him, Crimson hissed, beating Bellatrix in the arm repeatedly with the heel of his hand. She pushed him away, but he only gave up his attack when he heard the sound of the stranger's voice. Preacher man. The man glanced back to his crew, laughing a little. He was more than pleased. I told you this ain't over. Chambers cracked the window. What do you want? He called out, beads of nervousness glinting on his furrowed forehead. Y'all did me a nice favor, picking me up, feeding me, fixing my foot. My friends and I got separated when a horde came through a few days before that. But ain't it a miracle, preacher man? I once was lost, and now I'm found. The other man hanging off of the truck got down. He had dark skin etched with tattoos and piercings all over, and a thin strip of densely coiled black hair and a mohawk. He laughed and then abruptly hacked and spat. The stranger slowly approached the van, step by step, with as much care as if he walked a tightrope, knowing fully well his deliberate nature was building her dread. I appreciate what you and your lady did for me, but your girl, she gave me a good whack last night. Damn near cracked my head open. I thought for a second there she might have even killed me. Appreciate that she spared your life and leave us alone. The stranger's eyes went dark. So dark, Bellatrix thought for a moment they were solid black, 2 angry slits in his sun-battered face. I don't like being almost killed. Makes me mad. Real mad. So I have a proposal. Let's get even. Give me the girl. Absolutely not, Katura boomed. Well, I'd rethink that if I was you, seeing how you got a little boy to look after and a man with probably a broken wrist. There was a momentary pause. It's just sprained, Chambers yelled resentfully. I can still take you. You couldn't take my grandma's wandering corpse. Let's not kid ourselves. Zealots can't fight. Ted, what are we going to do? Crimson pleaded in a hushed whisper. I'm going to count down from 5, the stranger yelled. Kids, when we get out, I want you to jump out of the back of the van and make a run for it. What? Bellatrix cried, her eyes nearly popping out of her skull. 4. You should have killed him, Crimson screamed at her. Why didn't you just kill him? I can't do this, she cried. You're such a coward, Crimson wailed. Chambers turned back in his chair and reached out to Bellatrix with his good hand. As he gripped her hand and looked into her eyes, it felt like time had suspended, the world frozen around them. His expression was full of affection, mingled with trepidation, eyes moist. Bellatrix, you can do this. You have something they don't. You have the spirit to guide you. 3. How will I hear the spirit? I can't hear him like you and Mom. You will hear him, Chambers said with full assurance, his grip on her hand like a vice. 2. Protect your brother, Trixie Belle, Katura said. Get ready to run, Chambers continued, turning back in his seat and gripping his hammer awkwardly. His dominant hand was injured. Katura equipped her own weapon from a medical bag under the front passenger seat, a bone saw Bellatrix had seen her mother use for amputations, trying to save lives and limbs. She never thought she'd see the day when her mother would use it to try to take lives instead. 1. Chambers and Katura got out of the van and immediately rushed the stranger. Both Bellatrix and Both Bellatrix and Crimson watched in horror from the van, unable to move. They had been instructed to run, but Bellatrix felt glued to her spot, unable to do anything but watch. Chambers jumped on top of the stranger, punches thrown in either direction. He was easily subdued and brought back down to the ground with a knee in his back. The stranger hog-tied his wrists and ankles together. She could see the pain on her father's face, his bad wrist black and purple, aching against the tension of the rope binding him. The stranger didn't seem to care one iota, cracking jokes and laughing with his comrades. Crimson grabbed at her and yelled, "We have to help them!" Bellatrix had never seen him panic before. Katura slashed at her with her saw at the tattooed man, but he easily dodged and threw his elbow into her throat. She dropped the saw, gagging. The man wound his powerful fingers through her dreadlocks and dragged her along, loading her into the back of the truck. Bellatrix was in shock, unsure what the right course of action was. Staying here meant a fight one way or the other. Her parents couldn't take these two men. How would they take a skinny girl and a little boy? Should they run like her father had told them to? Would the strangers pursue? She had no idea where she was. She had no idea how to survive on her own. Everything was falling apart around them. "Mom! Dad!" Chambers screamed. Crimson. Bellatrix tried to force her hand over his mouth to stop him from drawing their attention. Every second counted as she desperately tried to think this through. The blonde stranger looked up from her father, his trophy, and stared at her with a menacing smile. Crimson pushed her hand away, screaming, "Get away from him!" Bellatrix's teeth were clenched so hard they felt they might crack. Sweat dripped down her brow, her pulse pounding so hard in her ears it deafened the commotion outside. "Run!" her father screeched into the dust. Blood and dirt streaked on his face and clouding the lenses of his eyeglasses. The stranger pulled a burlap sack over his head and punched him with brass knuckles. Her father's neck went limp, his head falling forward and hitting the ground. Bellatrix grabbed hold of Crimson's wrist and slid the side door open, ready to run. "Let's go!" she yelled, when he unexpectedly wrenched his wrist from her grip, and ran towards their parents, brandishing his pocket knife from his belt loop. The men laughed at Crimson as he slashed his little blade at them. "We've got a tough guy," she heard the man who had captured her mother say. The other responded, "He can join the team." The stranger got off of Chambers to square off with the little boy. He laughed again as Crimson jabbed the knife at his gut. "Easy there, champ, or you might scratch me with that thing." The stranger backhanded Crimson with a loud crack. He teetered on his toes, stunned by the blow, and was grabbed by his bright orange hair. "You were right. Sure as hell she should have killed me." "Bellatrix!" Crimson screamed. "Help me!" She froze, a deer in headlights. His hazel eyes were pleading with her, begging her. What could she do? What could she possibly do to save them? The stranger passed Crimson off to his buddy, and then turned his attentions to her. "Come here, girl," he called after her, mockingly making kissing noises. "Don't be modest." Bellatrix did the only thing she could do. She ran. Glancing back, she could see the man was giving serious chase. The diesel truck followed, but it was slow to navigate the devastated roadway. The wreckage grew denser around her the further she ran up from the road, turning corners and climbing over debris. Up ahead was an old apartment building, partly intact. Glass was blown out of the windows, and almost all the top floors had fallen, exposing parts of its skeletal framework. She ran through the threshold. Doors lay off the hinges on the ground, crumpled like tinfoil. It was dark inside, and she nearly ran into an overturned shopping cart rusting away in the dank foyer. Turning a corner, she found an apartment door open. There was a breathy moan, and the hairs rose on the back of her neck. The dead, fairly loud, somewhere nearby. She scrambled into a closet in the living room of the ruined apartment. Her lungs burned as she forced herself to breathe as quietly as possible. Through the crack between the door and frame, a stream of dim gray light came through. Dust particles danced as she made out the former dining room from her hiding place. A crystal chandelier lay shattered on the collapsed table. There was a crunch. Footsteps. A deep, gravelly voice echoed in the apartment. Come out wherever you are," he sang quietly, listening out for her. There was a pause. "You want to get us alone, huh? Jealous of my girl, ain't you? Don't worry. We're going to pick up exactly where we left off last night." She clenched her hand over her mouth, holding her breath. He was now standing directly in front of the closet. Beads of sweat rolled a thick layer of dust away from the man's angry face as he breathed heavily, waiting for her to make a sound. He looked around and settled his eyes on the closet. She leaned back into the shadows, frozen. The stranger withdrew his blade from his sheath on his hip. "You in there?" Plaster crackled beyond the dining room. The man turned his head to the sound, and then followed it until she could see him no more. "Got you now," he called in a sing-song voice. There was a pause, when a sudden commotion ensued. Banging and moans filled the place. There was a grunt and a yelp, more frantic footsteps, more shuffling, followed by a horrible scream. She saw two bodies stagger past the closet door from the way she had come, following the raucous with hungry rasps. Her knees went weak as she listened to the chaos, bangs and thuds she couldn't identify. She ached to leave the closet, but the man's final cries of life had already alerted the others, who were now filing through the living room. Tears of frustration spilled down her cheeks as she dare not risk an encounter with the dead. As she listened to their wet, sloppy sounds of their feeding, Bellatrix became nauseated, unable to summon the courage to break free. Her thoughts turned to her family. All this hadn't been about being fair or getting right. They were traffickers, and her family was the commodity. Trafficking was a lucrative business, and human flesh was in high demand. For labor, for brothels, for butchers. She dropped her head back against the wall, trying not to gag. Silently she prayed, God, how could you let this happen? How could you... She stopped. In her soul, she knew this wasn't God's doing. She remembered when her father had said that this was man. Man had wanted to play God. Man wanted to be God. But God would not be mocked. For everything God could create, the world could only mimic. Man wanted immortality, but it was only God's to give. Now he had created a bastard, a counterfeit, an abomination. She remembered that night so long ago, when she had first heard the word, Immortex. It had been mandatory viewing on television. They all sat in the living room, Bellatrix curled under her father's arm. There was a big parade with music and fireworks. She remembered being so excited that a little girl just like her was performing the anthem of the state. Then the one state's premier scientist came onto the stage. He had an announcement to make. They had identified the gene for aging, and with a miraculous cure in the form of a virus, they could turn off the body's ability to age, and thus to die. It had been created so that politicians, the president, the statesman, the chief scientist, could continue to be the eternal custodians over the one state, guaranteeing safety and peace. Of course, it couldn't stop death by fatal injury, but that fact was quickly brushed over. After all, it was immortality in every other aspect, and it was declared the greatest innovation in the history of mankind. The expectation had been gratitude from those under their leadership. These were their leaders, willing to take on the burden of leading, well, forever. But that wasn't the case. First, celebrities and athletes of the one state demanded it. They were the influencers, glittering idols of social media and entertainment, promoting health, wellness, and beauty, while keeping patriotism relevant and aspirational to the public. Why was it that the politicians could be immortal, but they could not? There was nothing glamorous or aspiring about growing old and withering away. When they were appeased, the indignant first-class citizens organized protests. These were met with less consideration. So protests turned into riots, fires, assassination attempts. Everyone wanted to defy death, even if it meant risking their very lives in the process. Of course, the state wouldn't allow this kind of defiance to carry on. Although the news wasn't allowed to report on the matters, it was common knowledge that many protesters were executed. Others were sent away for re-education, never to be seen again. The only thing that stopped the chaos was the same thing that would later cause complete catastrophe. Drug lords, taking advantage of the demand for an alternative to the inaccessible drug, made their own affordable street version. Black market purchases were certainly illegal, but how could anyone resist? Her own parents were able to get a hold of it and dosed themselves. It was expensive, but her parents felt it was worth it, and immediately began saving to buy Bellatrix her own dose for when she turned 21. Efforts were poured into trying to eliminate the black market version of the drug, but seeing the revenue to be had, the government instead made their own inexpensive version of the drug and made it available to the general citizens. Drug dealers saw that they were losing business, so, in an effort to keep up the demand, a new version of the drug was synthesized, Rush. Not only did it do what it was supposed to do, but the high, a serotonin and adrenaline rush, was so exquisite, customers kept coming back for more. Things seemed quiet for a time, and life returned to normal, until strange little rumors started to spread like a wildfire. Rush was causing massive heart attacks, killing users at random, and that's when things went very, very wrong. The virus took over, and the body capable of only the most primal of tasks: attack, consume. The corpse would eat any living creature it could get a hold of, but it was humans that were the most problematic. If someone was bitten and escaped, The bite was always inexplicably fatal. The wound would turn black and several hours later went necrotic. The victim would develop symptoms similar to the flu, coughing, fever, and sweating, followed by delirium. Death was inevitable. But if the victim was immortal, it was only a matter of minutes until they reanimated. Alive but dead, functioning but festering, ravenous but never satiated. And the vicious cycle continued. That is what brought on the end. Thank you guys for listening to Chapter 2. I'm very sorry about the couple of errors that I made in the text. If you have any questions or if you want to leave a comment, you can. Also, the book is available for sale on Amazon and Kindle. For those of you who would prefer to have Kindle, it is $1.99. If you have Kindle Unlimited, it is free. And if you prefer paperback, it is $14.99. And I heard if you have Prime, you get free shipping. So don't hesitate to purchase, and I love you all, and thank you so much. God bless. Whoops.